Alright everyone, settle in for tonight's exploration. We're veering off the well-trodden path of heroic sagas and stepping into something a touch more unvarnished. Prepare for a deep dive not into celebrated triumphs of battle, but into the forgotten toil and the everyday grit of life. For the common soldier in the trenches of World War I on the Western Front. That stirring image of valiant charges and battlefield glory you've encountered in films and patriotic tales, well, the unvarnished truth of daily existence was often a far cry, a monotonous soul-crushing struggle against mud, disease, and despair. And frankly, your modern comforts would feel like an impossible luxurious dream. So find your coziest spot. If you appreciate a journey into the raw, unfiltered past, a like on the video would be fantastic, and do consider subscribing for more of these historical reality checks. As always, I'm curious to know where you're joining us from tonight. Drop a comment with your location and time. It's always a highlight seeing our global community. Okay, perhaps dim those lights, let a soft ambient sound fill the room, and let's embark on tonight's rather sobering journey together. Your journey into this subterranean world likely began with a patriotic fervor, a naive belief in a short, glorious war. The recruitment posters, the cheering crowds, the smart new uniform, all a distant memory now. You were herded onto crowded trains, then cattle trucks, inching closer to a reality no training could fully prepare you for. The distant rumble of artillery, once a thrilling novelty, is now the soundtrack to your waking and sleeping hours, a constant reminder of the industrialized slaughter just over the horizon, or perhaps just over the parapet. Your old life, with its simple comforts, feels like it belonged to another person, in another universe entirely. The final approach to the front line is often under the cloak of darkness, a stumbling, nerve-wracking trek through communication trenches. These are narrow zigzagging ditches, already slick with mud, perhaps littered with the debris of war, discarded equipment, ration tins, and things less identifiable. You are weighed down by your kit, rifle, ammunition, entrenching tool, gas mask, rations and personal items. The air grows heavier, carrying the stench of stale smoke, latrines, damp earth, and something else, a sickly sweet odor you learn, with a sickening lurch in your stomach, to associate with decaying flesh. Your first sight of the trench system proper is an assault on your senses and your spirit. It's not the neat, orderly fortification you might have imagined. Instead, you find a chaotic network of ditches, varying in depth and repair, often half-filled with stagnant, stinking water. The walls are shored up with rotting sandbags, corrugated iron, or wooden planks, constantly threatening to collapse. Duckboards, slippery and often broken, form a precarious walkway over the mire below. This is your new home, your world, a muddy rat-infested labyrinth, carved into the scarred earth. You ask yourself how long you must endure this. You are assigned a section of the trench, perhaps a fire step overlooking no man's land, or a damp, cramped dugout carved into the trench wall. Privacy is a forgotten luxury. You are pressed shoulder to shoulder with your comrades, men from all walks of life, now united by shared misery and an uncertain fate. The dugout, if you are lucky enough to have one, offers minimal protection from the elements and shrapnel, but it's often lice-ridden, damp and crowded. The air thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, stale tobacco smoke, and damp wool. The mud. It's a pervasive, inescapable enemy, more constant than the human one. In wet weather, which is frequent on the Western Front, the trenches transform into quagmires. The chalky soil of Flanders, or the clay of the Somme, becomes a thick, glutinous ooze that clings to everything, sucks at your boots, and makes every movement an exhausting effort. Men drown in it, their bodies lost to the ooze. Your uniform is perpetually caked, your boots leaden weights, your very being seems to saturated by the cold, clinging wetness. Sanitation, or the lack thereof, is a defining feature of trench life. Latrines are often crude pits, sometimes just a designated section of a disused trench, often too close to living quarters for comfort or hygiene. They overflow in heavy rain, spreading their foul contents. The smell is overpowering, a constant assault on your nostrils. Flies swarm everywhere in warmer months, breeding in the filth and feasting on exposed rations and human waste, carrying disease from one man to the next, with terrifying efficiency. You try to hold your breath, but it's impossible. Vermin are your constant companion. Rats, grown fat on discarded food and human remains, are audacious and numerous. They scuttle through dugouts at night, sometimes across sleeping men, their squeals a familiar sound. Lice, known as chats, infest your clothing and bedding, causing incessant itching and trench fever, a debilitating illness with high fevers and severe pain. Delassing is a constant, largely futile battle, involving picking them off one by one or trying to scorch them with a candle flame, often damaging your already threadbare uniform. Your daily rations are monotonous, and often inadequate. Bully beef, canned corned beef, hardtack biscuits, so hard they could break teeth, and maconachi stew, a tinned concoction of turnips, carrots and potatoes in a thin broth, are staples. Fresh food is a rarity, a longed-for luxury. Sometimes the rations arrive contaminated by mud or gas, or are spoiled by the long journey to the front. You dream of a hot, home-cooked meal, of fresh bread, of anything other than the unending cycle of preserved, unappetizing fare. Hunger is a dull, constant. Water is another precious, often tainted, commodity. It's usually transported to the front in petrol cans, often giving it an unpleasant metallic or oily taste. Chlorination tablets are used to purify it, adding another foul flavor. In shelled areas, water sources can be contaminated by corpses or chemicals. Dehydration is a risk in hot weather. While in winter water freezes in your canteen, you learn to conserve every drop, to ignore the taste, to simply be grateful for liquid. The weather dictates much of your suffering. In winter the cold is bone-chilling, seeping through your inadequate clothing, numbing your extremities. Trench foot, a painful condition caused by prolonged exposure to damp and cold, can lead to gangrene and amputation. Frostbite is common. You huddle together for warmth, your breath misting in the frigid air, your fingers too stiff to properly handle your rifle. Sleep is a frozen, fitful affair. Summer brings its own miseries. The heat can be stifling in the confines of the trench, the air thick with dust and the stench of decomposition. Flies and mosquitoes are rampant. The sun beats down, baking the mud into a hard, cracked surface, but offering little relief from the underlying dampness. Sunstroke is a concern, and the glare off the chalky soil can be blinding. You long for the coolness of evening, even if it brings its own dangers. Disease is a constant threat, thriving in the unsanitary conditions. Dysentery, typhoid and influenza sweep through the trenches. Skin infections, boils and fungal growths, are common due to the constant dampness and lack of hygiene. Medical facilities are rudimentary at the front line. An evacuation to a field hospital is a perilous journey. You see men around you, succumbing not to enemy bullets, but to the invisible enemies breeding in the filth. The daily routine, if not punctuated by an attack or heavy shelling, is one of monotonous labor and anxious waiting. Stand to at dawn and dusk, the times most favored for enemy attacks, involves manning the fire step, rifle ready, peering into the misty gloom of no man's land. During the day there are endless chores, repairing trench walls, draining water, digging new latrines, fetching rations and water, and sentry duty. Boredom can be as corrosive as fear. No man's land, the desolate strip of earth between your trenches and the enemy's, is a place of dread and grim fascination. It's a shattered landscape of shell craters, tangled barbed wire and the decaying remains of fallen soldiers from both sides. Patrols venture out at night, a terrifying game of cat and mouse, to gather intelligence, repair wire or recover the wounded or dead. The thought of being caught out there wounded and alone is a recurring nightmare. The shelling is an ever-present terror. The ground shudders, the air screams, and shells of all calibers rain down, sometimes for hours, even days on end. There's nowhere to hide, no real safety. You cower in your dugout or press yourself against the trench wall, praying the next shell doesn't have your name on. The noise is deafening, concussive, driving men to the brink of madness. Each explosion is a lottery of life and death. Shell shock, what we would now recognize as PTSD, is a common affliction. The constant strain, the horrific sights, the proximity to death, it breaks men's minds. You see comrades trembling uncontrollably, unable to speak, or staring blankly, their spirits shattered. Some are evacuated, labeled as cowards by those who don't understand. Others try to hide their symptoms, fearing the stigma, until they can no longer cope. The psychological wounds are as deep and lasting as any physical injury. Letters from home are a lifeline, a fragile connection to a world of sanity and love. You read them over and over, treasuring every word, every mundane detail of life. Back on the home front, writing letters is more difficult, trying to convey your experiences without causing undue worry, or trying to find words for the unspeakable. The censor's black pen hovers over your shoulder, a reminder that even your thoughts are not entirely your own. Moments of respite are few and far between. A brief period in reserve, a few miles behind the front line, offers a chance for a hot bath, often in a communal brewery vat, clean clothes usually just deloused and reissued, and perhaps a visit to an histamine for some weak beer and a fleeting illusion of normalcy. But even here the sound of the guns is never far away, a reminder that your return to the trenches is inevitable. Comradeship is the bedrock of your survival. The men you share a trench with, who endure the same miseries, become your brother. You rely on them, and they on you, for your physical and emotional well-being. You share your meager rations, your fears, your hopes. Dark humor, often macabre, is a common coping mechanism, a way to deflect the horror. The loss of a comrade is a deep personal blow. The nights are often worse than the days. The darkness is absolute, filled with unseen terrors and amplified sounds. Sentries strain their eyes, imagining movement in no man's land. Sleep is fitful, interrupted by shelling, sentry duty or the scurrying of rats. Nightmares are common. The cold seems to bite deeper in the dark, and the sense of isolation can be overwhelming, even when surrounded by sleeping men. Work parties are a constant feature of trench life, usually carried out at night to avoid enemy observation. You might be tasked with repairing barbed wire entanglements, digging new trenches or saps, small tunnels dug towards enemy lines, or carrying heavy loads of supplies, ammunition, timber, sandbags, up to the front. This work is exhausting, dangerous, and often carried out under sporadic enemy fire. Your muscles ache, your hands are blistered, gas attacks are a terrifying prospect. The silent, insidious approach of chlorine, phosgene, or mustard gas, brings panic and a desperate scramble for your primitive gas mask. The masks are stuffy, uncomfortable, and offer limited visibility. The effects of gas are horrific: choking, blindness, severe burn. The lingering contamination of mustard gas can poison the ground for days, making whole sections of the trench uninhabitable. The psychological impact of this invisible killer is immense. Hygiene is a constant struggle. Shaving is difficult with cold, dirty water. Washing your body is a rare event. Your clothes become stiff with mud and sweat. The smell of unwashed humanity is pervasive. Small cuts and abrasions easily become infected in the filth. Keeping your rifle clean and in working order is a vital yet challenging daily task, as mud and dampness are its enemies too. The landscape itself is a casualty of war. What were once fields, villages, and woods are now a desolate, pockmarked wasteland, devoid of vegetation, shattered by shellfire. Trees are reduced to blackened, splintered stumps. The ground is a churned mess of mud and craters. It's a vision of hell, a testament to the destructive power of modern warfare. This environment grinds down your spirit, as much as any physical hardship. Food preparation, when possible, is a grim affair. Small fires are lit in braziers, or biscuit tins, often attracting enemy sniper fire or shelling. Cooking is rudimentary, usually just heating tinned rations or brewing tea. The taste of smoke, mud and despair often taints your meal. You learn to eat quickly, mechanically, without enjoyment, simply for sustenance. The memory of a flavorful, well-cooked meal is a distant, painful fantasy. Trench maintenance is a never-ending task. Parapets, the front wall of the trench, and parados, the back wall, constantly crumble and need rebuilding with sandbags. Drainage ditches need to be cleared to prevent flooding. Duckboards need repairing or replacing. This Sisyphean labor provides a distraction from the waiting, but it's exhausting and often feels futile, as the next shelling or downpour can undo all your work in moments. The constant presence of death is something you must, somehow, learn to live with. You see men killed or horribly wounded by shells, bullets, or disease. You might have to help bury your comrades in shallow, hastily dug graves, or see their bodies lying unrecovered in no man's land. The normalization of death is one of the most dehumanizing aspects of trench warfare. You become calloused, or you break. Religion and superstition offer comfort to some. Many soldiers carry Bibles or religious trinkets, finding solace in prayer. Others develop elaborate superstitions, a lucky charm, a ritual before going on patrol, anything to feel a sliver of control in a world governed by random chance and overwhelming violence. Chaplains do their best to offer spiritual support, but their words can feel hollow in the face of such suffering. Leave is the dream that sustains many, a few precious days away from the front, back in blighty Britain, or a French town. The anticipation is immense, but the reality can be jarring. The return to civilian life, with its safety and normalcy, can make the horrors of the trenches seem even more unreal, and the prospect of returning even more unbearable. Some men find it hard to readjust, feeling alienated from those who haven't shared their experiences. The sounds of the trench are a unique symphony of horror. The crack of rifles, the chatter of machine guns, the whistle of shells overhead, followed by their earth-shattering explosions, the groans of the wounded, the shouts of orders, the squelch of boots in mud, the drip of water in a dugout, the gnawing of silence is rare, and often more menacing, pregnant with the expectation of renewed violence. Snipers are a constant invisible threat. A moment's carelessness, raising your head too high above the parapet, can mean instant death. Both sides employ skilled marksmen, who pick off unwary soldiers with chilling efficiency. This adds another layer of tension to your daily existence, forcing you to stay low, to move cautiously, to always be aware of the unseen enemy watching from across the mud. The impact on your feet is severe. Constant immersion in cold water and mud leads to trench foot, where the feet become numb, swollen, and eventually gangrenous, if not treated. Keeping feet dry is almost impossible. Whale oil is sometimes issued to rub on the feet as a preventative measure, but its effectiveness is limited. The pain can be excruciating, and many soldiers are crippled by this condition. Boredom alternates with terror. Long periods of inactivity are spent huddled in the trench, waiting for rations, waiting for mail, waiting for the next shelling, waiting for an order to attack, waiting for the war to end. This enforced idleness, combined with the constant underlying stress, can be mentally corrosive. Men try to pass the time by gambling, writing, reading, if they have anything to read, or simply staring into space. Contact with the enemy, outside of full-scale attacks, is often impersonal. You fire your rifle at distant, fleeting targets, or operate a machine gun spraying bullets across no man's land. Occasionally on patrols or during trench raids, you might encounter the enemy face to face, a brutal, terrifying experience that often ends in savage hand-to-hand combat with bayonets, clubs and trench knives. These moments are seared into your memory. The concept of personal space is non-existent. You eat, sleep and exist in close, often uncomfortable proximity to dozens of other men. The smells, the sounds, the constant jostling, there is no escape. This enforced intimacy can breed strong bonds, but also friction and irritation. You learn to tolerate things that would have been unthinkable in your civilian life. Trench art is a poignant form of expression. Soldiers whittle wood, carve intricate designs on shell casings, or sketch scenes of trench life. These small acts of creation are a way to combat boredom, to assert individuality, and to leave some tangible mark in a world dedicated to destruction. These artifacts, often beautiful in their own right, speak volumes about the human spirit's resilience. The fear of being buried alive is a potent one. Heavy shelling can cause dugouts and trench walls to collapse, trapping men underneath tons of earth. Rescue attempts are frantic, and often futile. The thought of a slow, suffocating death in the dark, beneath the mud, haunts your waking hours and invades your dreams. The cycle of trench duty, a few days in the front line, then a period in support trenches, then a brief rest in reserve, and then back to the front, governs your life. Each rotation brings a mixture of dread and relief. The front line is the most dangerous, but even in reserve you are still within range of artillery and subject to work parties and drills. There is no true escape until leave, or the end of your service. Your uniform, initially a source of pride, becomes a filthy, lice-infested, mud-caked second skin. It offers little protection against the elements, or enemy weapons. Helmets protect against shrapnel, but not direct hits. Boots wear out quickly in the constant wet and mud. Getting a replacement for any piece of kit is a slow, bureaucratic process. You learn to make do, to patch and mend. The local civilian population, if any remains near the front lines, exists in a state of bewildered misery. Their homes are destroyed, their fields are battlegrounds. They are caught between warring armies, their lives irrevocably shattered. Sometimes you encounter them, ghosts in their own land, and their suffering adds another layer to the grim tapestry of war. The arrival of new replacements, fresh-faced and often terrified, is a regular occurrence. You see in them the same naivety you once possessed. You might offer a word of advice, a cynical warning, or simply observe them with a kind of weary pity. Their chances of survival, you know, are often slim. They are more fodder for the relentless machine. Singing and music, surprisingly, persist even in the trenches. Soldiers sing popular tunes, folk songs or darkly humorous parodies to keep their spirits up, to foster camaraderie, or to simply drown out the sounds of war for a brief while. A mouth organ or a battered concertina can be a prized possession. These moments of shared song are oases of humanity in the desert of despair. The use of alcohol and tobacco is widespread. Rum rations are often issued before an attack, ostensibly to steady nerves, but also contributing to recklessness. Cigarettes and pipe tobacco are constantly in demand, traded and hoarded. These substances offer a temporary escape, a brief dulling of the senses, a way to cope with the unceasing stress and discomfort. The landscape of no man's land changes with each shelling, each patrol, each failed attack. It is a constantly evolving monument to futility and death. Sometimes truces are unofficially observed to allow both sides to collect their wounded or dead. Brief moments of shared humanity before the killing resumes. These are rare and precarious,
your perception of time becomes distorted. Hours can drag like weeks during a heavy bombardment, while days of monotonous routine can blur into an undifferentiated mass. The future is uncertain, measured only until the next patrol, the next attack, the next rotation out of the line. You learn to live in the present, as looking too far ahead is often unbearable. The bonds with your immediate section or platoon become incredibly strong. These are the men you trust with your life, who understand what you are going through without needing words. You share everything, from your last cigarette to your deepest fears. The loss of one of these comrades is like losing a part of yourself. Their memory stays with you. The arrival of mail is a pivotal event. Letters and parcels from home are eagerly anticipated, a tangible link to a world that still values love, family and peace. News from loved ones, however mundane, is devoured. Photographs are treasured. These small things help to keep a flicker of hope alive in the oppressive darkness of the trenches. The overwhelming sense of waste is inescapable. The waste of lives, the waste of resources, the waste of human potential. You see it all around you, in the shattered landscapes, the endless cemeteries, the broken bodies and minds of your comrades. The grand strategic objectives, if you ever understood them, seem utterly disconnected from the squalid reality of your daily existence. Repairing barbed wire entanglements in no man's land, at night, is one of the most hazardous duties. You crawl through the mud, often under enemy flares and machine gun fire, trying to mend the protective barriers that are vital for your trench's defense. Your hands are torn by the wire, your nerves frayed by the constant danger. Every rustle, every shadow, could be an enemy patrol. Sleep deprivation is chronic. Sentry duty, work parties, shelling, and the general discomfort of the trenches make a full night's sleep an impossible luxury. You catch a few hours here and there, often in awkward, cramped positions, fully clothed and ready to react at a moment's notice. Exhaustion becomes your default state, a heavy cloak you can never shrug off. The longing for simple things becomes intense. A clean bed, a hot bath, dry socks, a meal that doesn't come out of a tin, a moment of silence, the absence of fear. These are the luxuries you dream of, the things you promise yourself you will never take for granted again, if you survive. This yearning for normalcy is a testament to what has been stolen from you. The view from the fire step at dawn is often surreal. Mist hangs over no man's land, shrouding the horrors with. The rising sun might briefly illuminate the desolate landscape, revealing the stark reality of your surroundings. It's a moment of cold beauty quickly followed by the resumption of the day's grim routines. Another day to be endured, another day closer to the end of your tour in the front line, even if it's just a temporary rotation to the rear, brings an almost euphoric sense of relief, quickly tempered by the knowledge that you will have to return. You carry the sights, sounds and smells of the trenches with you, an indelible stain on your soul. The experience changes you in ways you are only beginning to comprehend. The return to the trenches after a brief respite is a descent back into hell. The familiar stench, the mud, the rats, the shelling, it all comes rushing back, often with a greater intensity now that you've tasted a semblance of safety and cleanliness. The psychological adjustment is brutal. Each return chips away a little more of your resilience. The quiet moments, when the guns fall silent for a while, can be unnerving. The sudden absence of noise is disorienting, almost threatening. You find yourself listening for the next shell, the next burst of machine gun fire. Peace, even temporary, feels unnatural, a brief lull before an inevitable storm. You are conditioned to chaos. You learn to distinguish the different sounds of incoming shells, to judge their proximity, their caliber. This grim knowledge is a matter of survival. The whistle of a whiz-bang, a high-velocity field gun shell, gives you almost no time to react, while the slower, heavier shells have a more ponderous approach, allowing a few precious seconds to seek cover, however inadequate. The camaraderie extends to a shared, unspoken understanding of fear. It's not cowardice to be afraid, it's a natural human reaction to an unnatural situation. What matters is how you manage that fear, how you continue to function despite. The bravest men are not those without fear, but those who carry on their duties in its terrifying presence, supported by their comrades. Ultimately, your existence in the trenches is a testament to human endurance, and to human folly. You are trapped in a vast, impersonal meat grinder, your individual life of little consequence in the grand scheme of the war, yet you find ways to survive, to maintain a sliver of humanity, to hope for a future beyond the mud and the blood. This grim chapter will define you, and your generation, forever.
The early 17th century unfolded across the Low Countries as an era of unparalleled vibrancy, a golden age for the newly independent Dutch Republic. Amsterdam, with its concentric rings of canals reflecting the gabled facades of merchant houses, pulsed as the heart of a burgeoning global empire. Its harbors teemed with ships returning from distant spice islands, the Americas and the Levant, their holds laden with exotic goods and unimaginable wealth. This was a society brimming with confidence, fueled by maritime prowess, innovative finance, burgeoning industries, and a spirit of intellectual and artistic ferment. Rembrandt van Rijn was capturing the souls of its citizens on canvas. Hugo Grotius was laying the foundations of international law, and scientists like Antony van Leeuwenhoek were peering into unseen worlds through newly crafted microscopes. Prosperity touched many, fostering a burgeoning middle class, with a taste for luxury, refinement in the novel. It was into this dynamic, optimistic, and increasingly affluent society that a flower of extraordinary beauty and exotic allure made its captivating entrance, a bloom that would soon sow the seeds of an unprecedented and bewildered amarella. The tulip, its origins tracing back to the mountainous steppes of Central Asia, had found its way into the sophisticated gardens of the Ottoman Empire, where it was cultivated and prized for its elegant form and vibrant colors. Sultans adorned their palaces with its image, and poets sang its praises. It was from Constantinople, the gateway between East and West, that the first tulip bulbs are thought to have reached European soil in the mid-16th century, perhaps brought by envoys or merchants. Carolus Clusius, a renowned botanist at the University of Leiden, played a pivotal role in popularizing the tulip in the Netherlands. Around 1593, he planted his collection of bulbs, received from Ogia de Busbecq, the Habsburg ambassador to the Ottoman court, in Leiden's botanical garden. These were not the sturdy uniform tulips that populate modern fields, but more varied, often delicate specimens, their colors ranging from deep purples and scarlets to pure whites and soft yellows. Initially, the tulip was a curiosity for wealthy collectors, botanists and aristocrats, a rare and exotic specimen admired for its singular beauty. It became a coveted item in princely gardens across Europe, a symbol of sophistication and discernment. But in the Netherlands, with its unique confluence of commercial enterprise and a broad base of citizens with disposable income, the fascination with the tulip began to take on a different character. The Dutch, already renowned for their passion for horticulture, were captivated. What particularly intrigued them were the broken tulips or bazaars, whose petals displayed intricate, flame-like streaks and feathered patterns of contrasting colors. These mesmerizing patterns, it would later be discovered centuries later, were the result of a virus, the tulip-breaking virus, which infected the bulb and caused this variegation. At the time, however, the cause was unknown, making the appearance of these beautiful breaks seem like a wondrous, unpredictable gift of nature, rendering such bulbs exceptionally rare and desirable. As the 17th century progressed, the demand for these unique tulips, especially the virus-broken varieties, began to outstrip the slow pace of their natural propagation. A single bulb could take several years to mature and produce offsets, and the coveted color breaks were unpredictable. This inherent scarcity, coupled with the flower's aesthetic appeal and its association with wealth and status, laid the fertile ground for a speculative market. Merchants, ever alert to new opportunities, began to see the potential for profit, not just in selling flowers, but in trading the bulbs themselves. The trade started modestly enough. Connoisseurs and wealthy enthusiasts paid handsome sums for rare bulbs. A particularly prized variety, like the legendary Semper Augustus, with its blood-red flames on a pure white ground, became almost mythical in its rarity and value. As stories circulated of substantial profits being made from these transactions, the allure of tulip trading began to spread beyond the elite circles of collectors. The burgeoning Dutch middle class, skilled artisans, prosperous shopkeepers, and even moderately well-off farmers, saw an opportunity to emulate the wealthy and perhaps to achieve a swift and dramatic improvement in their own fortune. By the 1620s, the trade was becoming more organized, though still largely confined to those with some capital. However, the true mania, the period that would become infamous as tulipanmanie, or tulip mania, began to gather momentum in the early 16th. What transformed a niche market for luxury goods into a widespread speculative frenzy was the development of trading in tulip futures. Essentially, contracts to buy bulbs at a set price at a future date, even before the bulbs themselves had been lifted from the ground. This practice, known as wind handle or wind trade, allowed for rapid buying and selling of paper promises, detached from the physical reality of the bulbs. It opened the market to a much wider range of participants, including those who possessed little actual capital but hoped to profit from the constant upward trajectory of prices. The atmosphere during these years must have been electric. Taverns and inns, particularly in cities like Amsterdam, Haarlem, Hoorn and Alkmaar, transformed into makeshift stock exchanges. Amidst the clinking of tankards and clouds of tobacco smoke, men from all walks of life gathered to not just wealthy merchants and brokers, but weavers, blacksmiths, chimney sweeps, and serving maids were drawn into the whirlwind. Prices for even common bulbs began to escalate wildly, and for the rare, broken varieties they reached astronomical levels. It was said that a single bulb of a prized variety could be exchanged for a grand house on an Amsterdam canal, for acres of fertile land, or for a lifetime supply of food and livestock. While some of these tales may have been exaggerated by contemporary moralists or later historians, the underlying reality was one of an extraordinary and irrational inflation of value. The psychology of the mania was potent. The fear of missing out, the sight of neighbors and acquaintances, seemingly making fortunes overnight, the constant buzz of excitement and rumor, all contributed to a collective delusion. People invested their life savings, mortgaged their homes and businesses, or bought bulbs on credit, convinced that prices could only continue to rise. The intrinsic value of the tulip bulb, a mere plant root, that might or might not produce a beautiful flower, became entirely disconnected from its market price. Its value was determined solely by the belief that someone else would be willing to pay even more for it in the future. This was the pure essence of a speculative bubble. Contemporary accounts and satirical pamphlets from the period offer vivid glimpses into the frenzy. We hear of a sailor who, mistaking a valuable tulip bulb for an onion, casually ate it with his herring, only to discover he had consumed a fortune. Another story tells of a visiting English botanist, who, unaware of the bulb's worth, began dissecting a rare specimen, much to the horror of its Dutch owner who had paid a princely sum for it. These anecdotes, whether entirely factual or embellished, served to illustrate the absurdity of the situation and the almost sacred status that these humble bulbs had acquired. The mania permeated Dutch society. Conversations in homes, marketplaces and even churches were dominated by talk of tulips, of new varieties, of record prices, of fortunes made and anticipated. Artists, reflecting the tastes of their patrons, incorporated tulips into their still life paintings, not just as beautiful objects, but as symbols of wealth, status and perhaps the transience of earthly possessions. The very vocabulary of commerce became infused with tulip terms. Varieties with grand names like Admiral van der Eyck, Viceroy, or Generalissimo commanded premium prices, their names reflecting the maritime and military glories of the Dutch Republic. However, not everyone was swept away by the frenzy. Some sober-minded merchants, clergymen, and moralists voiced concerns about the speculative excesses. They warned of the dangers of gambling, the sin of avarice, and the folly of investing real wealth in something as ephemeral as a flower bulb, whose price bore no relation to its use or true worth. Religious sermons condemned the wind handle as a perversion of honest industry and a path to moral ruin. But in the intoxicating atmosphere of ever-rising prices, such warnings often fell on deaf ears. The lure of quick riches proved too strong for the sophisticated financial instruments available in the Dutch Republic, while a testament to its advanced economy, also facilitated the mania. Promissory notes, letters of credit, and complex shareholding arrangements allowed for leveraged speculation on a scale previously unseen. The very efficiency of the Dutch financial system inadvertently provided the mechanisms through which the bubble could inflate so rapidly and to such an extreme. Then, inevitably, the bubble burst. The precise trigger for the crash, which began in early February 1637, is debated by historians, but the underlying cause was a dawning realization that the escalating prices were unsustainable. Perhaps a group of prominent traders in Haarlem failed to find buyers at a routine bulb auction, or perhaps a piece of unsettling news spooked the market. Whatever the immediate catalyst, confidence, the invisible thread holding the entire edifice aloft, suddenly snapped. Panic selling erupted. Those who had bought bulbs at inflated prices, often on credit, desperately tried to offload their holdings, but buyers had vanished. Prices plummeted with terrifying speed. A bulb that might have been valued at thousands of guilders 1 week was worth only a fraction of that amount, or nothing at all. The next, the taverns that had recently buzzed with excited traders now echoed with cries of despair and bitter recrimination. Fortunes built on paper profits evaporated overnight, leaving many individuals and families ruined. The aftermath was chaotic. A wave of defaults swept through the market,
as buyers found themselves unable or unwilling to honor contracts made at the height of the mania, for bulbs whose value had now collapsed. Courts were inundated with lawsuits, as sellers tried to compel buyers to pay the agreed-upon price. The social fabric, stretched, taut by the frenzy, now threatened to tear. The Dutch authorities, initially reluctant to intervene in what they considered private commercial matters, were eventually forced to step in. Various city councils and provincial courts attempted to find ways to settle the outstanding contracts, often proposing that buyers fulfill a small percentage, perhaps 10% of the original agreed price. However, these solutions were often unsatisfactory and inconsistently applied, leaving a legacy of bitterness and financial hardship for many. Historians continue to debate the precise extent of the economic damage caused by the tulip mania. Some argue that its impact on the overall Dutch economy was relatively limited, affecting primarily a segment of the population involved in the speculative trade, and that the Dutch Golden Age continued its robust trajectory, largely unabated. They point out that the trade was in futures contracts, and actual physical goods or capital did not always change hands to the extent the paper values might suggest. Others contend that the crash did cause a significant, albeit temporary, economic shock, and certainly led to numerous personal bankruptcies, and a period of social distress and disillusionment. What is undeniable is the profound psychological and moral impact of the event. Tulip mania became an enduring cautionary tale, a stark illustration of the dangers of speculative bubbles, herd behavior, and the human propensity for greed and collective delusion. Pamphlets, poems, and paintings from the period and shortly thereafter often depicted the folly of the tulip traders, sometimes allegorically, serving as a memento mori, a reminder of the vanity of worldly pursuits and the fleeting nature of fortune. The term tulip mania itself entered the lexicon as a shorthand for any irrational speculative bubble. Yet, despite the trauma of the mania, the tulip itself did not fall out of favor in the Netherlands. Its intrinsic beauty and charm, and after the speculative fever subsided, a more rational and sustainable horticultural industry for tulips gradually developed. Dutch growers, with their skill and dedication, became world leaders in cultivating and hybridizing tulips, eventually transforming the flower from an exotic luxury into an accessible pleasure and a significant export industry that continues to thrive to this day. The vibrant tulip fields that carpet the Dutch countryside each spring are a testament to this enduring legacy, a far cry from the frenzied trading floors of the tulip, once the object of an irrational obsession, has become a beloved national symbol of the Netherlands, its image synonymous with the country's beauty and horticultural prowess. The story of tulip mania offers a fascinating window into a unique period of history, a moment when a society at the zenith of its power and prosperity was gripped by an extraordinary, inexplicable passion for a flower. It reveals the complex interplay of economic forces, social aspirations, human psychology, and cultural trends. It demonstrates how easily perceptions of value can become distorted, how quickly rational judgment can be overwhelmed by collective emotion, and how fragile the foundations of speculative fortunes can be. In the quiet galleries where the still-life masterpieces of the Dutch Golden Age now hang, the tulips depicted with such meticulous detail often carry a subtle resonance. They are beautiful, certainly, but for those who know the story of the mania, they are also reminders of a time when these blooms held the power to make and break fortunes, to captivate a nation, and to teach enduring lessons about the human condition. The calm surfaces of these paintings belie the storm of speculation that once raged around their living counterpart. The echoes of tulip mania have resonated through subsequent centuries, serving as a historical touchstone whenever new speculative bubbles have inflated and burst, from the South Sea bubble in the 18th century to more recent financial crises. While each historical instance has its own unique context and characteristics, the underlying human behaviors, the optimism bias, the herd instinct, the fear of missing out, the eventual panic, show a remarkable consistency. The Dutch Republic in the 17th century was a place of extraordinary innovation and enterprise. Its citizens were pioneering new forms of finance, global trade, and artistic expression. The tulip mania can be seen, in part, as an unintended and unfortunate byproduct of this very dynamism, a moment when the nation's commercial energies and its appetite for the new overstepped the bounds of prudence. It was a brief but intense chapter in a much larger story of remarkable achievement. The calm that eventually returned to the bulb markets did not erase the memory of the madness. It left an imprint on the collective consciousness, a folk memory of fortunes won and lost on the ephemeral beauty of a flower. The canals of Amsterdam continued to reflect the sky, the ships continued to sail, and the artist continued to paint. But the episode served as a sobering reminder that even in an age of gold, folly could bloom with an astonishing intensity. The tulip, in its quiet elegance, ultimately outlasted the fever it had inadvertently inspired, retaining its place as a cherished object of beauty, a symbol not of fleeting wealth, but of nature's enduring artistry and the rich cultural heritage of the Netherlands. The wind handle was over, but the tulip itself in well-tended gardens and ordered fields continued to flourish, a more lasting and gentle legacy of that remarkable time.
The city of Alexandria, founded by the Macedonian conqueror Alexander the Great on the shores of the Mediterranean, rose like a phoenix from the coastal plains of Egypt in the late 4th century BC. It was envisioned not merely as a strategic port or a new capital, but as a cosmopolitan crucible where the intellectual currents of East and West would converge. Under the astute and ambitious Ptolemaic dynasty, Alexander's successors in Egypt, this vision blossomed into a radiant reality. Alexandria quickly became the vibrant intellectual and cultural epicenter of the Hellenistic world, its magnificent harbor dominated by the towering Pharos lighthouse, one of the wonders of the ancient world, guiding ships laden not just with grain and papyrus, but with scholars and seekers of knowledge from across the known lands. Within its royal quarter, the Brachyon, amidst opulent palaces and verdant gardens, lay an institution that, more than any other, embodied Alexandria's claim to intellectual supremacy, the Great Library, and its parent institution, the Mausoleum. This was not to be just another collection of scrolls, but a monumental endeavor to gather, preserve and understand the entirety of human knowledge. The driving force behind this audacious project was Ptolemy I Soter, a discerning general under Alexander, who upon becoming pharaoh of Egypt, sought to legitimize his rule and elevate Alexandria's prestige not only through military might and economic prosperity, but through unparalleled cultural and intellectual patronage. Inspired, it is said, by the philosophical schools of Athens, particularly Aristotle's Lyceum, Ptolemy, advised by the exiled Athenian statesman and scholar Demetrius of Phalerum, conceived of the Mausoleum, the shrine of the Muses. This was far more than a temple, it was a state-sponsored research institute, a community of scholars dedicated to literature, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and every other field of human inquiry. And at the heart of the Mausoleum, its most vital organ, was the Great Library. Its mission was breathtakingly simple, yet unimaginably vast: to acquire a copy of every significant scroll ever written, in any language, from any culture. Ptolemy II, Philadelphus, Soter's son and successor, pursued this grand ambition with even greater fervor and resources. Under his reign, the library's collections swelled dramatically. Agents were dispatched throughout the Mediterranean and beyond, armed with royal funds, to purchase or copy texts. A famous, perhaps apocryphal, decree stipulated that any ship docking in Alexandria's harbor that carried books not already in the library's possession must surrender them. These scrolls would be meticulously copied by the library's scribes. The original was often retained, and the copy returned to the unfortunate owner. This aggressive acquisition policy, while high-handed, underscored the Ptolemies' determination to make Alexandria the undisputed repository of global wisdom. Texts were sought from Greece, Persia, India, and from Jewish communities, whose scriptures were famously translated into Greek within Alexandria, creating the Septuagint. The library itself, or rather the main library located within the Mausoleum in the royal quarter, was said to be a magnificent complex of buildings. While no definitive archaeological remains have been identified with certainty, classical accounts describe colonnaded halls, walkways for peripatetic discussion, shared dining rooms, private reading chambers, lecture halls and scriptoria, where scribes toiled endlessly. It was a true temple of learning, where scholars, freed from the mundane concerns of daily life by royal stipends, free meals and exemption from taxes, could dedicate themselves entirely to research, debate and the pursuit of knowledge. A later doubter library was established at the Serapeum, a grand temple dedicated to the god Serapis, in another part of the city, to house overflowing collections and perhaps to provide wider public access. The sheer volume of scrolls was staggering, estimates ranging from 40,000 to an incredible 700,000 at its peak, though the higher figures likely include multiple copies or individual sections of larger works. Each papyrus roll, a fragile treasure, represented a voice from the past, a fragment of human thought. To manage this vast accumulation, a system of organization and cataloging was essential. Zenodotus of Ephesus, the first head librarian, began the arduous task of standardizing texts and organizing the collection. But it was the poet and scholar Callimachus of Cyrene who created the Pinaces or tables, a comprehensive bibliographical survey in 120 books, listing authors and their works, categorizing them by genre, and providing biographical information. This monumental work, itself now lost save for fragments and references, was effectively the first great library catalog, a testament to the scholarly rigor that underpinned the library's operation. The community of scholars drawn to Alexandria by royal patronage, and the unparalleled resources of the library, constituted a veritable constellation of ancient intellectual luminaries. For centuries the Mausoleum was a beacon for the brightest minds of the Hellenistic and Roman world. Euclid, whose elements codified geometry with such logical rigor that it remained the standard textbook for over 2 millennia, likely worked and taught in Alexandria. Eratosthenes of Cyrene, a polymath who served as chief librarian, famously calculated the circumference of the earth with astonishing accuracy, using simple geometry and observations of the sun's angle at different latitudes. He also created sophisticated maps of the known world, and developed a chronology of historical events. Archimedes of Syracuse, the great mathematician, physicist and engineer, though primarily based in Sicily, is said to have visited Alexandria, and perhaps studied there in his youth, maintaining connections with its scholars. Aristarchus of Samos, working in Alexandria, proposed a heliocentric model of the universe centuries before Copernicus, though his ideas were largely overshadowed by the prevailing geocentric views of Aristotle and Ptolemy, the later astronomer, not the dynasty. In the field of medicine, Herophilus of Chalcedon, and Erasistratus of Suez, pioneers of anatomy and physiology, conducted groundbreaking research in Alexandria, allegedly performing human dissections, a practice largely taboo elsewhere, which greatly advanced the understanding of the human body. Literary scholarship also flourished. The Alexandrian scholars meticulously collected, edited and commented upon the canonical texts of Greek literature, particularly the Homeric epics. Figures like Zenodotus, Aristophanes of Byzantium, not the playwright, and Aristarchus of Samothrace, a different Aristarchus, developed critical editions, standardized texts, and invented systems of accentuation and punctuation that helped preserve and transmit these works to future generations. Poets like Apollonius of Rhodes, author of the epic Argonautica, and Callimachus himself, contributed to a new wave of sophisticated learned Hellenistic poetry. The library was not just a repository of past knowledge, it was a vibrant center for the creation of new knowledge and artistic expression. Alexandria was a true melting pot, and the library reflected this cultural dynamism. Greek scholarship formed its core, but Egyptian traditions were also studied, and the large influential Jewish community of Alexandria contributed significantly to its intellectual life. The translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek, the Septuagint, undertaken in Alexandria, was a monumental scholarly achievement that made these sacred texts accessible to the wider Greek-speaking world, and profoundly influenced the development of both Judaism and early Christianity. Philosophical schools, drawing on Platonic, Aristotelian, Stoic, and Epicurean traditions, debated and evolved within the city's intellectual ferment. The decline and ultimate disappearance of the Great Library of Alexandria was not a single dramatic event, as popular myth often portrays, but a long complex process spanning several centuries, marked by a series of destructive events, shifting political fortunes, changing intellectual currents, and gradual neglect. The romantic image of a single great fire consuming all the world's knowledge in one tragic night is a simplification, if not an outright fabrication, of a much more nuanced and protracted story. One of the earliest blows came in 48 BCE during Julius Caesar's Alexandrian War. While pursuing his rival Pompey, Caesar became embroiled in a dynastic struggle in Egypt. During the fighting, fires set by Caesar's troops to burn enemy ships in the harbor reportedly spread to parts of the city near the dock. Some ancient sources claim that warehouses storing scrolls, perhaps destined for the library or part of its collection, were destroyed. The extent of the damage to the main library within the Mausoleum, located further inland in the royal quarter, is debated by historians. It seems unlikely that the entire institution was annihilated at this time, as scholars continued to work and the library continued to function for centuries afterwards, but it may have suffered significant losses. The following centuries brought further periods of instability and upheaval. In the 3rd century CE, during the reign of Emperor Caracalla, who reportedly harbored a grudge against the Alexandrians, the city suffered reprisals, and scholars at the Mausoleum may have been persecuted. Later in that same century, Emperor Aurelian, while quelling a rebellion led by Queen Zenobia of Palmyra, laid siege to Alexandria, and fighting heavily damaged the Brachion district, where the Mausoleum and the main library were located. This conflict likely caused substantial destruction to the library's buildings and collections. By this point, the Serapeum, with its own significant library, may have surpassed the original Mausoleum library in importance and size. A pivotal and highly symbolic moment occurred. Emperor Theodosius I, a fervent Christian, issued a series of decrees outlawing pagan worship throughout the Roman Empire. Under the zealous leadership of Patriarch Theophilus of Alexandria, a Christian mob, emboldened by these imperial edicts, attacked and destroyed the Serapeum. This magnificent temple, a major center of pagan worship, also housed a substantial library often referred to as the daughter library. While the primary target was the pagan temple itself, the scrolls housed within were almost certainly dispersed, looted or destroyed in the process. This event marked a significant blow to the preservation of classical, non-Christian learning in Alexandria. The final chapter, often cited in the library's destruction narrative, involves the Arab conquest of Egypt in 64. A much-repeated story, first appearing several centuries after the event, tells of Caliph Omar, when asked what to do with the books in the library, supposedly declaring, "If these writings of the Greeks agree with the Book of God, they are useless, and need not be preserved. If they disagree, they are pernicious, and ought to be destroyed." Consequently, the scrolls were said to have been distributed to Alexandria's bathhouses, to be used as fuel, lasting for 6 months. Most modern historians, however, view this account as a later fabrication, a piece of propaganda anachronistically projected back onto the conquest. There is little contemporary evidence to support it, and it contradicts the generally tolerant practices of early Muslim rulers towards existing centers of learning. By the 7th century, the Great Library of the Ptolemies, and even the Library of the Serapeum, had likely long ceased to exist as coherent, functioning institutions, their collections already depleted and scattered by centuries of conflict, neglect, and ideological shift. What truly led to the demise of Alexandria's intellectual beacon was a slow attrition, political instability, civil wars, purges of scholars by various rulers who saw them as politically suspect, declining royal or imperial funding, the rise of new intellectual centers, and a gradual shift in the cultural and religious climate all played their part. The meticulous work of copying fragile papyrus scrolls required constant effort and resources. Without sustained institutional support, collections inevitably dwindled through decay and dispersal. A poignant episode in the later intellectual life of Alexandria is the story of Hypatia, who lived in the late 4th and early 5th centuries. A brilliant philosopher, mathematician and astronomer, renowned for her intellect, her teaching, and her virtuous character, Hypatia was a respected figure in a city increasingly torn by religious strife between Christians, Jews and pagans. She taught from her home, and became a symbol of classical learning and Neoplatonic philosophy. However, her association with Orestes, the Roman prefect of Alexandria, who was in a bitter political struggle with Cyril, the city's powerful and aggressive patriarch, made her a target. In 415 CE, Hypatia was brutally murdered by a Christian mob, allegedly incited by Cyril's supporters. Her death is often seen as a symbolic and tragic marker of the definitive end of the era of classical pagan learning in Alexandria, a chilling testament to the dangers of religious fanaticism and the fragility of intellectual freedom in times of upheaval. The loss of the knowledge contained within the Library of Alexandria is immeasurable, a wound in the intellectual heritage of humanity. Countless unique texts, including a vast majority of ancient Greek literature, works of history, science, mathematics, and philosophy, are known to us only through fragments, quotations in other surviving works, or simply by their titles listed in ancient catalogs. We can only speculate on the scientific discoveries, the philosophical insights, the historical narratives, and the literary masterpieces that vanished forever. Imagine the lost plays of Sophocles, Euripides, and Aeschylus, known only by title, the complete histories of Berossus on Babylonia, or Manetho on Egypt. The full extent of Hipparchus's astronomical observations, or the anatomical studies of Herophilus. The gaps in our understanding of the ancient world are, in no small part, a consequence of the library's demise. Yet, despite its physical disappearance, the legacy of the Great Library of Alexandria endured. It became an almost mythical symbol of universal knowledge, a utopian ideal of a place where all the world's wisdom could be gathered and made accessible. Its ambition inspired later libraries, from the monastic libraries of the Middle Ages, to the great national and university libraries of the modern era, and even the digital archives of our own time. The scholarly methods developed by its librarians, textual criticism, cataloging, the creation of critical editions, laid the groundwork for modern philology and the systematic study of text. The story of the Library of Alexandria
serves as a profound and enduring reminder of the preciousness and fragility of knowledge. It highlights the vital importance of preserving and transmitting cultural heritage, and the devastating consequences when that task is abandoned or actively undermined. It also speaks to the immense power of ideas to shape civilizations, and the courage of those individuals who dedicate their lives to the pursuit and dissemination of understanding, often in the face of indifference, hostility, or outright persecution. The light that once shone so brightly from Alexandria may have been extinguished, but the human quest for knowledge, the desire to understand ourselves and the universe around us, is a flame that continues to be passed from generation to generation, a perpetual effort to rebuild, in countless new forms, that lost temple of wisdom. The dream of a universal library, a place where all voices can be heard and all stories told, remains a powerful and inspiring ideal, an echo of the grand vision first conceived on the shores of the Nile Delta, more than 2 millennia ago. The silence of its vanished halls still speaks volumes about what was, and what might have been.
The vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, covering nearly a third of the Earth's surface, stretches like an immense liquid canvas, dotted with countless islands that shimmer like jewels scattered upon blue silk. For millennia, its sheer scale presented an almost unimaginable barrier, its horizons endless, its depths profound. Yet across this seemingly boundless water world, a remarkable human drama unfolded, a story of courage, ingenuity, and endurance that stands as one of the greatest feats of exploration and settlement in human history. Long before European caravels cautiously nosed their way into its immensity, another people, masters of the wind and waves, had made this ocean their own. These were the Polynesians, navigators of unparalleled skill, who in magnificent voyaging canoes, guided by the stars and the subtle language of the sea, wove a network of kinship and culture across thousands of miles of open ocean, settling some of the most remote habitable landmasses on the planet. Their story is an epic written not on parchment, but on the memory of the waves and the charts of the night sky. Imagine a vessel, unlike any crafted in Western boatyards, gliding silently across the dark undulating swells of the midnight Pacific. It is a pahi, a great double-hulled voyaging canoe, perhaps 60, 70 or even 100 feet in length, its twin hulls carved from massive tree trunks, lashed together with intricate sennit cordage, made from coconut fiber, supporting a sturdy deck upon which a small community lives and works. A single tall triangular sail, woven from pandanus leaves, catches the trade winds, propelling the craft steadily onward. On deck, families huddle around small carefully tended fires, the scent of roasting taro mingling with the salt spray. Children sleep, lulled by the rhythmic creak of the timbers and the ceaseless murmur of the ocean. And at the stern, or perhaps on a special platform, stands the navigator, the Tafunga Tarai Vaka, his eyes fixed on the celestial sphere above, a living library of ancestral knowledge, his mind a complex computer processing the myriad signs of sea and sky that will guide his people to a new home, a pinprick of land he may never have seen, yet knows exists beyond the horizon. The origins of these remarkable seafarers trace back to the Austronesian expansion, a vast migration of peoples that began thousands of years earlier from the islands of Southeast Asia, likely Taiwan. Possessing sophisticated maritime technology and agricultural practices, these groups gradually spread eastward and southward, settling the Philippines, Indonesia and Melanesia. A distinct cultural group known as the Lapita people emerged in Near Oceania, around 1500 BCE, recognizable by their distinctive dentate-stamped pottery. They were daring seafarers, pushing the boundaries of known waters, and it is from the Lapita that the ancestors of the Polynesians are believed to have sprung. They made the crucial leap into the previously uninhabited islands of remote Oceania, first settling West Polynesia, the island groups of Fiji, Tonga, and Samoa, by around 900 to 800 BC. Here in this Polynesian homeland, a unique culture developed, and for reasons still debated by scholars, perhaps a period of consolidation, population growth, or the development of even more advanced voyaging technology. There was a long pause of several centuries before the next great wave of expansion began. When that new wave commenced, around the first centuries of the Common Era, it was with an astonishing burst of exploratory energy and navigational brilliance. The Polynesians pushed ever eastward, into the vast, largely unknown heart of the Pacific. Their primary vessel for these epic voyages was the double-hulled canoe, a masterpiece of Stone Age engineering. These were not simple dugouts, but sophisticated, ocean-going craft, built without metal tools, using stone adzes, fire and coral rasps, to shape and hollow out the massive logs. The twin hulls provided stability in rough seas and a large platform for carrying people, provisions and essential cultural cargo. They were rigged with highly efficient crab claw or triangular sails, allowing them to sail effectively both with and against the wind. These canoes were more than just boats, they were arks, carrying a portable landscape, taro corms, breadfruit saplings, yams, sweet potatoes, sugarcane, as well as domesticated animals like pigs, chickens and dogs. They also carried the intangible essentials, their language, their social structures, their religious beliefs, their myths and their deep ancestral knowledge. The art and science of Polynesian wayfinding, navigation without the aid of magnetic compasses, sextants, chronometers, or written charts, represents one of humanity's most profound intellectual achievements. It was a holistic system, relying on a deep, intimate understanding of the natural world, passed down meticulously through generations of oral tradition, often through chants and epic poems, that encoded vast amounts of information. Central to their system was a sophisticated star compass. Navigators memorized the rising and setting points of hundreds of stars and constellations throughout the year. By knowing the sequence of stars that would pass over a target island, or islands in a similar direction, they could maintain a remarkably accurate course, even on voyages lasting weeks or months, across thousands of miles of open ocean. The sun was another crucial guide, its path across the sky, its noonday position, and the subtle variations in its rising and setting points throughout the seasons provided vital directional cues. But perhaps most remarkably, Polynesian navigators learned to read the ocean itself. They could discern the direction of prevailing ocean swells, long, low waves generated by distant storms, which maintained a consistent direction even when local winds shifted. They understood how these swells would be refracted and reflected by islands, creating telltale patterns that could indicate the presence of land, long before it was visible. They also observed the flight paths of land-nesting birds, which commute between islands and their feeding grounds, knowing that certain species would reliably indicate the direction of land at dawn or dusk. Cloud formations, particularly those that characteristically form over islands, the color of the water, the presence of specific types of flotsam or marine life, all were pieces of a complex environmental puzzle that the navigator pieced together. Some traditions speak of itak, a dynamic system of mentally dividing a voyage into segments, based on sighting islands, either real or conceptual sea marks below the horizon, allowing the navigator to constantly reorient and triangulate his position. This was not rote memorization, but a dynamic, adaptive science, requiring immense skill, constant observation, and profound intuition. Armed with these remarkable vessels and this sophisticated navigational knowledge, the Polynesians embarked on a series of voyages that would eventually lead them to settle almost every habitable island in the vast Polynesian Triangle, an enormous area of the Pacific Ocean defined by Hawaii to the north, Rapa Nui, Easter Island to the southeast, and Aotearoa, New Zealand to the southwest. From the established homeland in West Polynesia, explorers ventured eastward, against the prevailing trade winds, a testament to their sailing prowess. They reached and settled the Cook Islands and the Society Islands, including the strategically important island of Tahiti, which became a major dispersal center for further migrations. From central eastern Polynesia, new voyages were launched. One of the most remarkable achievements was the settlement of the Hawaiian archipelago, a journey of over 2,500 miles across open ocean, likely from the Marquesas. These voyages, repeated over time, established a thriving Polynesian culture in these remote northern islands, a culture that would develop its own unique characteristics over the succeeding century. Equally astounding was the settlement of Rapa Nui, or Easter Island, the most isolated inhabited landmass on Earth, lying some 2,000 miles from the nearest populated land. Navigators likely sailing from the Marquesas or Mangareva, reached this small lonely outpost, sometime between. Here, in almost complete isolation, their descendants developed the unique culture famous for its colossal stone statues, the moai, a testament to their engineering skills and complex social organization, though one that also faced severe ecological challenge. The final corner of the Polynesian Triangle to be settled was Aotearoa, now New Zealand. These large temperate islands, vastly different from the tropical islands of Polynesia, were reached by navigators, probably from East Polynesia. These founding ancestors of the Maori people adapted their tropical agricultural practices and social structures to this new challenging environment, developing a rich and distinct culture characterized by intricate wood carving, powerful oratory, and a deep spiritual connection to the land. Life on each newly discovered island presented immense challenges and opportunities. The first settlers had to establish viable populations from small founding groups. They had to clear land, plant their transported crops, and learn to exploit local resources,
which varied greatly from volcanic high islands, with fertile soil and abundant rainfall, to low-lying coral atolls, with limited fresh water and poor soil. Over centuries, distinct yet related cultures, languages, and dialects evolved on different island groups and even on individual islands within an archipelago. Social structures often hierarchical with chiefs and priests holding significant power, mana, along with complex systems of land tenure, resource management, and religious beliefs, centered around a pantheon of gods like Tangaroa, god of the sea, Tain, god of the forest, and Rongo, god of agriculture, and the concepts of tapu, sacredness or prohibition, and mana, spiritual power or authority. Oral traditions, myths of creation, and epic poems recounting the deeds of gods, heroes, and ancestors formed the bedrock of their cultural identity, meticulously preserved and transmitted through generations. Art forms flourished, expressing their worldview and connection to the environment. Intricate tattooing, tattoo, fine weaving of mats and bark cloth, tapa, and powerful carving in wood, stone and bone. By around 1300 CE, the main period of long-distance Polynesian voyaging and settlement seems to have largely drawn to a close. The reasons for this cessation are complex and likely multifaceted. Perhaps most habitable islands within their reach had been discovered and settled. Climate shifts, such as the beginning of the Little Ice Age, may have altered wind and current patterns, making long-distance eastward voyaging more difficult. Growing populations on established islands may have led to increased resource pressure and internal conflicts, shifting focus from external exploration to internal development and consolidation. Or perhaps, after centuries of relentless expansion, a cultural shift occurred, with less emphasis placed on pioneering new frontiers. Inter-island voyaging continued within established archipelagos, but the great pioneering voyages into the unknown became rarer. Centuries later, when European explorers like Cook, Bougainville, and Wallis first sailed into the Pacific in the 18th century, they were astonished to find these remote islands already inhabited by sophisticated societies, with rich cultures, complex social systems, and a deep understanding of their environment. They marveled at the Polynesians' seamanship and their extensive knowledge of the ocean, though for a long time, many Western scholars, unable to comprehend how a Stone Age people could have accomplished such feats, proposed alternative theories, such as accidental drift voyages, or settlement from the Americas. It was only through meticulous archaeological research, linguistic analysis, studies of oral traditions, and more recently, the revival of traditional Polynesian voyaging techniques, using replica techniques, that the true scale and intentionality of their achievement have been fully recognized and celebrated. The modern revival of Polynesian voyaging, spearheaded by organizations like the Polynesian Voyaging Society, and its iconic canoe, the Hokulaya, which first sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti in 1976, using only traditional navigation methods, has been a powerful movement of cultural renaissance. It has not only demonstrated the efficacy of ancient wayfinding techniques, but has also reawakened a profound sense of pride and connection to ancestral heritage among contemporary Polynesians. These voyages have retraced the sea roads of their ancestors, carrying messages of cultural identity, environmental stewardship, and the enduring power of human ingenuity. The legacy of the Polynesian navigators is immense. They were, arguably, the greatest explorers of their time, their voyages surpassing in distance and navigational skill many of those undertaken by other cultures until much later periods. They systematically explored and settled an ocean realm that dwarfs any continent, demonstrating an extraordinary ability to adapt to diverse island environments, from tiny atolls to large volcanic landmasses. Their story is a profound testament to human courage in the face of the unknown, the power of accumulated knowledge passed down through generations, and the deep, intuitive connection that can exist between people and the natural world. They read the book of nature, the stars, the swells, the winds, the birds, with a skill that still astounds us. The peopling of the Pacific stands as a monumental achievement, a quiet epic of human endeavor that unfolded over millennia, leaving an indelible imprint on 1/3 of our planet's surface, a vibrant tapestry of cultures, woven across the vast, blue loom of the great ocean. Their voyages were not just journeys across water, but journeys into the very heart of what it means to be human, to explore, to adapt, to create, and to endure.